The night was cold, November 13th, 1974. The air was crisp and the silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. A chill settled over Amityville, Long Island, seeping into the bones of a family living on Ocean Avenue, the DeFeo family. They were an ordinary family, living in a seemingly ordinary house, but that night something sinister lurked in the shadows. 6 souls, soon to be silenced in the dead of night. The father, Ronald DeFeo Sr., a stern man with a commanding presence. The mother, Louise, a nurturing figure who held the family together. Their children, Dawn, Allison, Mark and John, each with their own dreams and aspirations, all unaware of the fate that awaited them. A series of gunshots shattered the silence. The tranquility of the night was abruptly replaced by chaos and terror. The echoes of the gunfire reverberated through the neighborhood, a harbinger of the horror that had just unfolded, each blast a nail in the coffin of a family's future. Dreams were shattered, lives were extinguished, and a once happy home was transformed into a scene of unimaginable carnage. Ronald DeFeo Jr., the eldest son, stumbled out of the house. His steps were unsteady, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He was a young man on the brink of madness, caught in the grip of forces he could not comprehend. His eyes were wide with a terror that spoke of something more than witnessing a crime. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the face of evil, who had been touched by a darkness that defied explanation. He claimed voices, whispers in the darkness, had driven him to it. These voices, he said, were relentless, insidious, filling his mind with thoughts of violence and death. They were the whispers of demons, urging him to commit the unthinkable, driven him to take the lives of his parents, his brothers, his sisters. The family he had grown up with, the people he had loved, were now gone, victims of a madness that had consumed him. The police arrived to a scene of unimaginable horror. The once peaceful home was now a crime scene, a place where innocence had been brutally snuffed out, a family wiped out in their beds. The sight was one of pure devastation, a tableau of death that would haunt the memories of those who witnessed it. The stench of gunpowder and death hung heavy in the air. It was a smell that clung to the walls, a grim reminder of the violence that had taken place. Ronald DeFeo Jr. became the prime suspect. His demeanor was one of shock and confusion, a man who seemed to be grappling with the enormity of his actions. His story, a chilling confession laced with claims of demonic influence. He spoke of voices that had commanded him, of a malevolent force that had taken control of his mind and body. The murders sent shockwaves through the small community. Amityville was a town where everyone knew each other, where such violence was unheard of. The news of the massacre spread quickly, leaving residents in a state of disbelief and fear. Amityville, once a peaceful haven, was now stained with the blood of an unspeakable tragedy. The streets that had once been filled with the sounds of children playing were now eerily silent, a community in mourning. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue stood silent, a grim monument to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. It was a place that had once been filled with laughter and love, now a symbol of death and despair. A darkness had taken root, a darkness that would soon ensnare another family. The Lutz family, unaware of the house's gruesome history, would move in only to be confronted by the same malevolent forces that had driven Ronald DeFeo Jr. to madness. The cycle of horror was far from over, and the house on Ocean Avenue would continue to be a place of fear and mystery for years to come. A year passed. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as time moved forward, indifferent to the horrors that had once taken place. The house on Ocean Avenue stood empty, a chilling reminder of the massacre. Its windows, like hollow eyes, stared out into the void, whispering secrets of the past to those who dared to listen. Then, in December 1975, a young family, the Lutz family, purchased the property. They arrived with smiles and dreams, unaware of the shadows that lingered within. George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, were drawn to the house's spaciousness and affordability. The rooms were large, the yard expansive, and the price was surprisingly low for such a grand home. They were aware of its history, but they dismissed the rumors of hauntings as mere superstition. Friends and neighbors warned them, but they laughed it off, confident that the past could not harm them. They moved in, their hopes high for a fresh start. Boxes were unpacked. Rooms were decorated and laughter filled the air as they settled into their new life. The house was large with a beautiful view of the water. The serene landscape seemed to promise peace and tranquility, a perfect backdrop for family memories. It seemed like the perfect place to raise a family. The children played in the yard, their laughter echoing through the halls, while George and Kathy enjoyed quiet moments by the water. But the Lutz family's dream of a peaceful life in their new home would soon turn into a nightmare. Strange occurrences began to disrupt their idyllic life, casting a shadow over their happiness. The house welcomed them with open arms, or so they thought. It seemed warm and inviting, a sanctuary from the outside world, but beneath the surface a darkness lurked. Unseen eyes watched from the shadows, and the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. A presence, unseen but felt, watched their every move. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and the family began to sense that they were not alone. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen menace. The house was awake. It whispered in the night, its voice a low, menacing hum that filled their dreams with dread, and it was hungry for more. The Lutz family had unknowingly stepped into a living nightmare where the past and present collided, and the house on Ocean Avenue demanded its due. It started subtly. Strange odors like rotten eggs and perfume permeated the air. The family initially dismissed it as a plumbing issue or perhaps something left to rot in the attic. But the smells were persistent, appearing at odd times and in different rooms, making it impossible to pinpoint their source. The scent of perfume was particularly unsettling, as it was reminiscent of a fragrance that no one in the house used. It was as if the house was trying to communicate, to make its presence known in the most intrusive way possible. Flies swarmed in the dead of winter. It was an unnatural sight, as if the insects were drawn to some unseen force within the house. They gathered in clusters, buzzing incessantly, their presence a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. The family tried everything to get rid of them, fly traps, sprays, even calling in an exterminator, but nothing worked. The flies always returned, more numerous and aggressive than before, as if they were the harbingers of the house's dark secrets. The temperature fluctuated wildly, sending chills down their spines. One moment, the house would be unbearably hot. The next, it would be freezing cold. The thermostat seemed to have a mind of its own, defying all attempts to regulate it. The family found themselves constantly layering and shedding clothes, trying to adapt to the unpredictable climate. It was as if the house was alive, its very walls breathing and shifting, creating an environment that was as hostile as it was uninhabitable. Then, the noises began, footsteps in the night. At first they thought it was just the house settling, the creaks and groans of an old structure, but the sounds grew louder, more distinct. Footsteps that seemed to follow them, echoing through the hallways, climbing the stairs, stopping just outside their bedroom doors. It was as if someone or something was walking through the house, unseen but ever present, a spectral intruder that refused to leave, whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The voices were faint, almost indistinguishable, but they were there. A constant murmur that filled the silence. Sometimes they could make out words, phrases that made no sense, spoken in a language they didn't understand. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, an omnipresent chorus that grew louder at night, making it impossible to sleep. It was as if the house was trying to drive them mad, to break their spirits with its incessant ghostly chatter. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects moved inexplicably. The family would find furniture rearranged, pictures tilted, and personal items missing, only to reappear in the most unlikely places. It was as if the house was playing a cruel game, testing their sanity with its poltergeist-like activity. They tried to ignore it, to rationalize it, but the occurrences were too frequent, too deliberate. The house was alive, and it was toying with them, pushing them to the brink of despair. The children, especially the youngest daughter, Missy, claimed to see a demonic figure with glowing red eyes. She described it in chilling detail, a shadowy entity that lurked in the corners of her room, watching her with malevolent intent. The other children were terrified, refusing to sleep alone, their nights filled with nightmares and screams. The parents tried to comfort them, to assure them that it was just their imagination, but deep down, they knew that something evil had taken residence in their home. Kathy felt an icy breath on her neck, a ghostly touch that sent shivers down her spine. She would wake up in the middle of the night feeling a presence in the room, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to envelop her. She tried to brush it off as a bad dream, but the sensations were too real, too vivid. It was as if the house was reaching out to her, trying to make contact, to draw her into its dark embrace. George became withdrawn, his demeanor increasingly aggressive. He was once a loving husband and father, but the house seemed to change him, to corrupt his very soul. He would spend hours alone, staring into the darkness, his mind consumed by thoughts he couldn't control. He became irritable, snapping at his family for no reason, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. It was as if the house was feeding off his anger, amplifying it, turning him into a stranger. He woke up every night at 3:15 a.m., the time of the DeFeo murders. It was an eerie coincidence, one that he couldn't ignore. He would lie in bed, staring at the clock, dreading the moment when the hands would align, marking the hour of death. It was as if the house was reminding him of its dark history, of the blood that had been spilled within its walls. The past and present seemed to blur, creating a nightmarish reality that he couldn't escape. The house was alive, its evil tendrils wrapping around the family, squeezing the life out of their happiness. It was a malevolent force, a dark entity that thrived on their fear and suffering. The walls seemed to close in on them, the rooms growing smaller, more oppressive. The house was a living, breathing monster, and they were its prey, trapped in a nightmare that had no end. Green, viscous ooze seeped from the walls, a manifestation of the house's malevolence. It was a sickly, putrid substance that defied explanation, a physical embodiment of the evil that permeated the house. The family tried to clean it, to scrub it away, but it always returned, more virulent and pervasive. It was as if the house was bleeding, its dark essence seeping through the walls, a constant reminder of the horror that lay within. The family dog, Harry, refused to enter the house, barking and whimpering at unseen forces. Animals have a sixth sense, an ability to perceive things that humans cannot, and Harry was no exception. He would stand at the threshold, growling at the darkness, his fur bristling with fear. The family tried to coax him inside, but he would not budge, his instincts warning him of the danger that lurked within. It was as if he could see the evil that they could not, a guardian that refused to abandon his post. The house was no longer a home. It was a prison of fear, a torture chamber of the supernatural. The family was trapped, their lives consumed by the malevolent force that had taken over their sanctuary. They lived in constant terror, their days filled with dread, their nights with nightmares. The house had awakened, and it would not rest until it had claimed their souls. For 28 days, the Lutz family endured a relentless onslaught of paranormal activity. Each day brought new horrors, pushing them closer to the brink of madness. Kathy discovered a hidden room painted red, a room that repulsed her to her core. George claimed to be possessed, his personality shifting from loving husband and father to a cold, distant stranger. The children's laughter was replaced with screams, their innocence devoured by the house's insatiable hunger for fear. The family held on, clinging to their sanity as the house tightened its grip. But they were no match for the forces at play. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Finally, on January 14, 1976, the Lutz family fled their home, leaving behind their possessions and their sanity. They left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the chilling memories that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The house on Ocean Avenue had won.